So we can start. I will start with a quick introduction of our guest today and then leave the mic to Otto. I'm very excited today to have Otto Hilska, founder and CEO at Swarmia. Otto has some incredible experience as founder of several startups, actually, and as VP of engineering, as chief product officer, investors. And he founded Swarmia to solve some of the challenges he himself saw in engineering organizations. So today, Otto will talk about how to juggle various engineering priorities with the so-called balance framework, which we kind of covered already in a previous Refactoring article that we wrote together with the guys at Swarmia, and we will discuss that more in detail today. So after the talk, there will be extensive Q&A where Otto will answer any question you may have. So I hope you enjoy it. And Otto, I leave the stage to you.
All right. Thank you, Luca, and thanks everyone for joining. So indeed, today we're talking about the balance framework and how to juggle the priorities in engineering, which is probably a pretty common topic for all of us. Before we get started, just quickly on what I've been up to. So at Swarmia, we're building tools to help the best software teams get better. So bringing visibility to engineering work without exposing those toxic engineering metrics that are considered harmful by most of your developers. And at the same time, also helping your organization actually improve their productivity. So that's kind of what we're building. And that's the reason why I've been really interested in how to maintain some sort of an optimal balance in building products. I've tried that in several companies over the years, and it's never easy. And I would even say that balancing engineering investment is what makes product development difficult. If you could just take feature requests from customers and keep adding them on top of each other, and that would result in a great product, then everyone could do it. But realistically, we have to combine all of these different crafts from product design and product management, engineering, to come up with something that you can actually keep developing in the longer term over the years. And you can see how most companies succeed at this temporarily, where they ship a great product, but then suddenly it's stagnant and not developing anymore, and they can lose the momentum and they eventually lose the business. So that's happening to quite a few companies out there, which I think shows how difficult this is, even when you have a really experienced and a great team. We're not the only ones thinking about this. This is a tweet by John Cutler, one of the modern Agile thought leaders on Twitter, just talking about how you need to kind of have a very balanced approach to shipping different types of work rather than the most common, let's just add new things, balance. Because if you kind of maintain the wrong balance, then you end up very deep in this hole where it's really expensive to escape from. And that's really what's slowing you down, because if you imagine that you're able to maintain this possibility to add new capabilities initially, and then it kind of flips the other way around and you're just dealing with unplanned work and interruptions coming from customers and production systems breaking, it's no wonder that there's just no chance for you to keep adding anything new. And I already said that it's kind of expensive, but it's incredibly expensive. If you have a small team that's going to the wrong direction with a bad balance, taking a lot of technical debt, a small team can build something that still takes years to fix, and a team a lot bigger to do something about that when you have a business that's already in the works. So paying attention to this as early as possible makes sense. And finally, in the beginning, for a disclaimer, we're talking about empowered product teams here. So we assume that teams maintain some ownership of their own backlogs. They're able to prioritize their own work. They're able to decide on how they run these things. So there's the old school way of kind of giving teams things to work on, but we really assume that teams should own their backlogs, and this kind of brings some of this problemacy to managing those teams. So let's talk about the balance framework. It was first introduced by a former VP of Engineering and Growth at Dropbox in a Medium blog post. And the idea is pretty simple. You can divide your work to a couple of different buckets. You have the mandatory stuff that you kind of just have to do, which is keeping the lights on. So if you didn't do that, your product would stop functioning and your business would stop running. So that's kind of something that's always there. And then from the remaining time you have, you can decide how much are you going to spend on building new things, like new product areas, new features, etc., versus improving existing features and existing things. So that could be adding a new kind of a sub feature to something that you already have, versus then improving your productivity, which is supposedly taking away some of that keeping the lights on work and helping your team move faster. So that's the simple idea. That's all there is. And having this terminology available to us actually is a good discussion starter for many teams, because oftentimes when we think about prioritization, we just talk about our opinions, or then someone's kind of overruling the priorities by saying that this is what the customers want and this is what we have to do. And then engineers might not really have a way to bring up these bigger refactoring projects or bigger infrastructure projects, because there's no common terminology with the product management to have this conversation. So by introducing something like this, it makes it easier to have a conversation where you're able to point out that we're able to cut some of the work from keeping the lights on, and we think this investment will pay itself back in a few months. So that's the kind of language that the rest of the business understands too. So let's look at all of these areas quickly. First, about keeping the lights on, I would say that's an area you really want to understand in terms of what is it that's contributing to this bulk of workload. It's a little bit unfortunate category, because from the business perspective, it's not kind of value adding. No one thinks that this is something that you actually want to invest in, but engineers usually understand that if we don't do this, we're going to be in big problems. But this kind of creates this constant tension in many organizations. This can be things like upgrading dependencies from your apps, or patching security vulnerabilities, or fixing some bugs, etc. But it's a good question, what should actually be here? Because, for example, not every bug is necessarily keeping the lights on mandatory type of work, because all of our apps have some kind of bugs, and some of them are pretty minor. Some of them are not really necessarily even causing that many issues. So we can't just say that we're going to fix every bug out there. But then again, there's going to be things that actually need to be fixed. So if something is broken on Internet Explorer 6, do we really need to fix that? Well, that kind of depends on your business and who your target customers are and what level of detail you're trying to maintain, what kind of a picture of quality you're trying to convey to your customers. So this is a little bit flexible, but you need to figure out what does it mean for your organization and where you can draw that line. But if there's some kind of a critical issue, it's going to have to get fixed. And this is the type of work that teams are often doing. Just looking at our own team as an example, we had a couple of keeping the lights on type of incidents recently. One is like we're using a lot of background processing for various messages coming from integrations and so on. And pretty often there's something that doesn't go through the processing, and we have to manually look into what was going on with it. It's something that's pretty specific to our business, but it's something that we're going to be chasing this type of issues forever. So building good tools for being able to do that very efficiently has been really helpful for us, because we understand that this type of work is pretty integral to what we're doing. At the same time, we're drawing these analytics dashboards with a lot of data from bigger customers. And the reality is that making it performant for all of them is a really difficult task. So figuring out how to keep the app performant is, again, something that we just have to be really good at doing. So we kind of have built a bunch of tools to make this as easy as possible, because we could just have our whole engineering team working on keeping the lights on stuff if we didn't actually do something about these most common issues that we tend to have. It's also good to note that when you're a bit bigger organization and you have multiple teams, the question of what's the scope of this team is a very relevant one. And keeping the lights on work is actually one of the ways you can try to estimate, is the scope of our team too broad? Because it could be that if your team is spending 80% of your time on keeping the lights on, that means that you don't have a lot of time for investing in anything that would kind of bring the business forward. And if someone's asking, why does it take so long for us nowadays to ship anything? Well, that's because we have all these engineers just keeping this platform up, which is not really optional. We kind of have to do that, but we just can't allocate a lot of time to building anything new. So in that case, sometimes the right solution is just to split the team and that way be able to invest more in that area, because you can't grow one team forever. So all this work is kind of one of the parameters to communicate to you how much, when is the right time to potentially invest more in one of the areas. The next thing on the list is new things. And I would say that's one thing you want to figure out first, because that's kind of what you're actually getting as a business, and also making sure that you're ensuring some kind of a minimum level of investment in this. Now, a product manager might think that we're going to be spending 90% of our time on building new stuff or something like that. But realistically, I would say you can maybe expect to spend half of your time on building new stuff, and that's already pretty good. And if you went to the wrong direction for a couple of years and you have a lot of technical debt and you have a lot of things slowing you down, it might be that you're not able to spend more than 30% of your time building the new things. But regardless, it doesn't matter. Many organizations are trying to do way too many things at once. And what they should really do is just figure out one thing that you're going to be doing, one new area that you want to expand to, and then at least make sure that that's done. And because that will help you actually ship something to the market as regularly as possible. And there's this metaphor about filling a bucket with rocks, pebbles, and sand, and you kind of have to put the rocks there first, because otherwise, if you put the sand there first, you're not going to fit the rocks in. And the similar thing applies to these bigger projects. The reactivity controls your prioritization. You can spend all of your time just keeping stuff up if you allow yourself to do that. But that's why you kind of need to figure out what is the one thing that we're going to be doing first, and then let the rest of these priorities kind of self-organize at the team level. Usually when I think about the new stuff, I think about teams who have quite commonly something like an objective, like objectives and key results, some kind of business outcome. That's a way to help teams to be empowered to make their own product decisions. So it's pretty important for them to understand the outcomes rather than have a list of things that they build. That outcome will translate to projects. So usually we talk about epics or projects or whatever. So it makes sense to figure out what is the next bigger step. And that's kind of what I meant when I talked about having the one thing figured out. So having at least one of these projects scoped out. Another way our team, for example, is keeping ourselves accountable is that we're publishing this change log every couple of weeks, and we're publishing a newsletter every month. So this kind of customer-facing thing makes ourselves accountable for shipping something customer facing every once in a while. It also helps us remember how sometimes even the smallest development effort can actually be really valuable to the customers. So it's much more about finding the right balance and the right things to do than necessarily like spending a lot of time on building specific features. Because if you're able to publish something all the time, people will get notice. You will get this kind of momentum built, and it will allow you to spend a lot more time on than the infrastructure work and everything else when people are seeing that your team is actually shipping. It's pretty common that people will lose trust in your team eventually if you're not shipping something that's kind of according to your team's objectives. So it is a good idea to think about that already early on. The third area is the existing stuff. So when you already have a feature in your product, it's likely pretty easy for you to do some kind of a small change for it. And for example, in the SaaS business that we're doing, it's pretty common that you have a big customer coming in. They really like the product, but there's some kind of a small thing that's not quite working for them and not quite supporting their workflows. And that's pretty natural. Now, we don't want to be building products for one customer, but when we have these ideas of small things that we could improve here and there, timing them correctly and shipping them in a timely manner is actually just a really nice way to make your business more successful. And so when the development team has the context from customers, they see kind of all the opportunities they could have, and they're able to make really quick decisions without too much overhead. This is just something that improves your product overall, because usually when you build a feature for the first time, it's never going to be a fully ready feature that handles every single corner case. So it's a lot better that the team is able to continuously improve it as you go on. And then the final area here is improving productivity, and prioritizing that work is pretty important. So let's talk about comfort foods. It's quite common that developers are stressed out by kind of all the technical depth and shifting priorities and everything else. And as a result, you might feel that you just want to fix something in the product to kind of feel better. And it's a pretty natural reaction, and it's happening quite a lot, but it might not be the most impactful thing. And one thing that's good to recognize is that it's okay to have some things that are broken, and you don't have to fix everything that's broken with your product and with your architecture. That's totally fine, but you should really focus on what are the biggest impact things that will help your team move forward. And in that sense, I really like the phrasing of improving productivity, because rather than talking about technical depth or refactoring or one of these topics, we're talking about productivity, which is ultimately about how do we move faster towards our goals. And that is actually a pretty nice way to frame this kind of things. And usually the way you can start thinking about this is just look at what's in keeping the lights on. Maybe you'll notice some patterns. Maybe you'll notice that our servers, we're still running those manually, and we're actually spending quite a lot of time on that. Then actually, it seems like that's about 25% of our team's effort goes into this. And maybe we could just automate all of this. Now, when we see this, it's pretty easy for us to make a calculation that, okay, we have an 8-person team, half of our time is going to keeping the lights on, and then 1/4 of that time is going to hugging servers. So actually we have one person in the team all the time just doing this one thing. And that will make it very concrete that, okay, well, we can actually fix this in a month, and actually this is going to pay itself back relatively quickly. So starting with that kind of a mindset is a good starting point. Another way you could look into it is analyzing your process and what's slowing you down. So one of the DORA metrics is something called the cycle time, which is introduced in the book Accelerate. It's about how long does it take for you to get your code to production. If you're looking into the features that you're building and how long does it take you on average to get it there, you might notice that, yeah, it takes us 2 months on average. And the reason is that we're doing deployments like this, we're batching these big changes and so on. So that might help you discover some patterns, and that might lead you to working on something like this. So for example, automating something in your CI pipeline. It could be that your code reviews are slow because you don't have any linters or any practices on coding standards, and people are arguing about silly things that are not very meaningful. Maybe just install a linter or prettier or anything like that, and move forward with your life. That's one way to accelerate it. Or maybe you're spending a lot of time on production incidents, and maybe they are kind of an inherent problem that you have, but at least you can make that work more productive by building some tools that will make it easier for you to debug these incidents. Or maybe it's really difficult to test anything with your development environments. Maybe you don't have the right kind of data to test with, so it's really difficult to know if something's going to be working, and that's going to slow you down. Or maybe it takes a long time for people to write automated tests. There's a million reasons for things that could be slowing you down. So starting to look into these things will help you identify what should you then actually start fixing. And for fixing those, I would maybe recommend just choose one thing at a time that will already get you somewhere if you're able to ship a lot of these individual changes one at a time. Because what often happens is that kind of teams end up being in a very kind of miserable place, not kind of where many things are broken and you try to fix all of them at once. That's going to be too slow. It's going to take a long time to get any of these projects done, and then someone else is going to get bored waiting for those new features, and etc. So just fixing one thing at a time will already get you started, and then you can decide if there's something more you want to invest in. And now, finally, how do you actually do this in practice, or what is relevant when thinking about rolling this out to your teams? When you're building these empowered teams, there's often this kind of tension between how much do we want to standardize as an organization and how much do we want to let teams figure out what do they do. Well, I'm leaning towards letting teams figure out a lot in terms of their process they want to run and how they want to structure their work, etc. But at the same time, it makes things easier if you've established some kind of a terminology across all the teams. So maybe talking about these kind of investment categories as kind of a standard terminology, that might be one thing. Maybe saying that we have epics as kind of bigger projects and we're going to be talking about those, or whatever it is. Just being clear on that and agreeing on some set of kind of standard rules makes it just easier to have this conversation when you have multiple teams. I've seen a bunch of different ways to measure this. I've seen people kind of doing Excel spreadsheets, asking from team leads how to do it. I've seen people pulling stuff from Jira, sometimes from GitHub. You can add labels to do that. You can kind of come up with all kinds of rules. We built some of these tools ourselves at Swarmia, and that's one part of it, but you can definitely do this on your own with a very rudimentary spreadsheet analysis to kind of get you started. Especially if you have a smaller team that only has a few things in progress, you should be able to do that. But one thing to note is that, for example, your issue tracker likely doesn't give you the full picture of this, because especially from the keeping the lights on work, there tends to be a lot of stuff that developers take care of, even if there is no issue for it. And that's great, because we all want our products to be up and running, and we want people to take ownership of the code bases. But realistically, there might not always be a Jira issue for it. So you have to figure out how to make this all work. But you can also pull some products out of the shelf. Also, one way, there's some really simple ways to start thinking about this. I would say you want to look forward and you want to look backward. So what I mean with that is, when you're working on something and when you're choosing what to do next, we used to use these physical Kanban boards like a couple of years ago. And we actually had this color coding for, like, there's a green user story when this is a new thing. Then we had a blue one when it's kind of improving existing features. And then we had the internal keeping the lights on as a purple one. So we kind of already did that. And just by looking at this board, you could see that what is the balance roughly looking like. And you can do similar things with your issue tracker. You can start establishing some kind of a labeling for your projects or anything like that. So figure out if there's some really simple way to do it, because that will already get you halfway there without having to do a lot of spreadsheet magic. So that's a nice way to start from. And then the other thing is what I briefly already mentioned, that you also want to look backwards, because the reality is that there's a lot of stuff, for example, in this model, there's a lot of these kind of tasks and bugs laying that is still work that's not maybe counted in user stories. So you still want to analyze it regularly. It doesn't have to be weekly. It doesn't maybe even have to be monthly, but you should still look into how did we actually do versus what did we intend to do. And that should give you then a feedback loop so that you can continuously improve. Because ultimately what balancing is, it's just a feedback loop, so that you're doing something, then you're figuring out that, okay, we're leaning too much to this direction. So we're going to course correct, and now we think we're doing well. And then you'll continuously learn from this. So this is also not something that you can fix once and let it run, but you actually have to think about this on a regular basis, whether it's every sprint, every month, every quarter, but at least you have to think about it on a relatively regular basis. So for a short recap, try to understand the type of work you have, keeping the lights on. First, prioritize the new things and ensure that you're doing at least some level of minimum investment there. Then be flexible and leave a lot of room for the team to figure out how do we want to improve existing stuff and when. And finally, make sure that you prioritize improving productivity and focus on the top impact things from that list. So that's a brief introduction to the balance framework. Thank you. And I'd love to have a quick conversation about this.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Otto, for this. I love that you blended both, theory and theoretical advice with practical ways of implementing this, and how to start basically with your team if you haven't, ever thought about this before. We can take questions from the audience. I have one that we can start with just to break the ice. So after you do this prep work, let's say, when you figure out what is keeping the lights on for you, you figure out the minimum investment, for example, about developing new things. what should be, in your opinion, the process for prioritizing the various categories of work during regular sprints? What I mean is, do you think we should have separate like swim lanes? That is, we have like kind of fixed amount of developer time for the various categories, and then within that amount of time, items from that category gets prioritized, but that stands pretty much the same, or we have fixed swim lanes only for a few of these categories, or anyway, even if you have a rough idea of how to balance things, you should all the time prioritize all the things against each other?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it depends a little bit on how you're running your process. Otherwise, I don't think you need to rethink your whole development process just because you're adding this. So what you said about swim lanes is exactly one of the great ways to do it. I wouldn't say that you need to have a swim lane for each of these 4 categories, because that might not result in the balance that you're looking for. But let's say you're trying to have some kind of a minimum investment on both the new stuff and on the productivity stuff. So what you might want to do is, this is a real example we had with a few Kanban teams, that we have 2 swim lanes for kind of the new things, stories, and then we have 1 for improving the productivity. And the new stuff is basically something it's mostly the product manager driving that prioritization. And then on the productivity front, it's mostly the developers driving the prioritization. So both of them are kind of coming from a slightly different source and with a different angle. And then we still have all these miscellaneous tasks and other smaller things coming up and so on. And then you kind of just have to, what I said about looking forward and looking backward, this is kind of the looking forward aspect by having the swim lanes there. And then you still have to see what kind of a balance did that result in, because you might also realize that you have developers who are maybe not familiar with the stuff that you're pushing from the roadmap, and they really love working on the productivity improvements. You might notice that there's 5 developers working on the productivity stuff, and even though you have 2 swim lanes of roadmap features, you have 1 developer on each, and the result is not the balance that you were looking for. So you also need to look backward and figure out what kind of a balance did we end up with. But at least it will be a pretty good starting point.
So these basically are topics that are good for retrospectives, where to discuss how things went, how you can do differently in the future. So you would raise this in retros like every sprint or every month with a regular cadence.
Yeah, that's for example what our own team is doing. We have retrospectives every 2 weeks. We always start by looking at kind of what did we work on, and I think it's a nice way to bring some context to the retros. It's much less about kind of some measures or metrics, anything like that. Much more about, let's just talk about the work we did, because that's a great context. And when you look at the work, you start to think about all kinds of other things that went well or didn't go so well with that work. So it's a really nice starting point for a retro.
Yeah, makes totally sense. Leave the stage to others if they have questions. I don't know if I should enable something to make people raise their hands. I'm not sure people can raise their hands right now, but if you want to mute yourself, anybody, if you want to ask a question, you can do so. Otherwise, I have others. I can go on like forever.
I have a question over here. Hi, Otto. Thanks for the presentation. It was especially useful to see the metrics and see like a real product that uses that. Because recently I came across this balance framework and tried to apply it in our product. And so far, I've added a custom field on user stories and the features that we can add what we call the value area, and then we also do time logging, which is probably annoying to most of the engineers, but yeah, still it was a requirement by upper management. Anyway, and I tried to put together the time logs with the value area and see how the last month went through from that perspective. Anyway, I haven't reached the part of asking the question. So my question is more detailed on the framework part. I was wondering, do you calculate the meetings, the scrum refinements, and the plannings under this categories? The thinking behind it is that, for example, if you are working on a new feature, I'm thinking that discussions about this feature are also part of investing in this feature, but maybe I'm wrong. So I'm just curious, what do you think about it?
Yeah, that's a good question. And you're right that most developers might find the kind of logging time on individual tasks slightly cumbersome, and rightfully so. It's pretty difficult to say how much time am I spending on something, like starting from thinking about it, then working with the designer on the details of it, and then reading the code base and doing the changes, etc. So there's just a lot of stuff to take into account. Also, when you're running a process of some sorts, you're going to have some level of overhead. You're going to have your company meetings, you're going to have your team meetings, there's going to be some planning involved. So there's a bunch of these things that's going to affect your ability to ship, but I don't think you need to treat this as kind of as fine-grained thing where you would look into individual hours, or is it 42% or 39% that's going to this. Usually the differences are quite clear. Like for some teams, they might be able to spend like 10% on new stuff, and some teams are able to spend 60%, and the difference is pretty huge. And so you can also pretty much bake in the overhead to these numbers, because essentially there is some amount of work that your team is able to ship. It's really difficult to quantify what is the amount of work that a team ships, but you can roughly estimate there's overhead involved with each of those. And similarly to how new features have maybe more design and planning overhead, you have bugs that have more research overhead, where you have to debug something and figure out what is this about. So there's always some of that involved. It's practically impossible to say, have an exact number for all of this stuff. So it's much more of a kind of a guidance and kind of a discussion starter to help you identify these problems.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I generally thought so, that it's you cannot calculate, let's say, how much time goes on discussions or planning, designing. But thanks for your input. That's all from my side.
Thank you, Hori. Other questions, guys? I have one myself then. So just Otto, to confirm something that you said at some point that I think it was very, very useful, and basically how to think about productivity tasks. You said there is a strict relationship basically between productivity and keeping the lights on. So just to confirm this, so a useful angle to think about what goes into productivity should be what reduces the effort of keeping the lights on, right?
Yeah, I would say that's maybe half of it.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of work that goes to keeping the lights on, and if you can reduce that, that's great. But then there is also, and I talked about cycle time and how you might want to look into your process otherwise, and how long does it take for you to kind of work on these other things, because that's the other way you can improve this, by just making everything that you do a little bit easier, so that there's less overhead in code reviews and there's less overhead in deployments and so on. So that is another way to improve productivity, but I would say those two are pretty much equally important.
Yes, makes totally sense. Other questions?
I have a question. So thanks for the presentation, Otto. In most of my teams I've been involved in so far, we had so-called specialized sprints like stabilisation. So, we had something like 5 or 6 new features being developed, and then we have more like a stabilization sprint. Do you recommend having specialized sprints, or you suggest to have in all the sprints a bit of all the 4 areas?
Yeah, that's a good question. I've actually had, it's been already a while. The last time I was in a team where we did that was maybe like 12 years ago. That team was shipping every 6 months. It was not a great team, largely due to the constraints coming from the business side, who felt that they needed to control everything that team did. And we had to negotiate for kind of these stabilization sprints, because the business side felt that they know better when, like, how much needs to go into that. And so I feel that, well, first of all, stabilization sprints can be a good thing. It is a way to get the team to swarm together on one topic. And when everyone's doing it, it kind of doesn't leave one person doing new features and then the junior developer is working on bug fixing and so on. So it kind of forces everyone to look into it. And usually just swarming on some problem is a great way to get your team to do it. And oftentimes you also need to have this kind of a practice round. Like, if you haven't done anything on performance optimization, then chances are that your team doesn't know how to do performance optimization, and they might not have the tools to even figure out what is low. So if you have a team focusing on that, it can be a nice way to kickstart that. But at the same time, if you think about the longer term goals, being dependent on stabilization sprints to fix stuff and not being it kind of comes with the idea that you're not really allowed to stabilize outside of the stabilization sprints sometimes. So then that's maybe not a good thing. And you would rather want to maintain some kind of a healthy balance all the time, rather than going all into features and then all into stabilization. It's not, I wouldn't say it's an anti-pattern or anything like that, but and it definitely has good sides to it, but I would still aim for that, like, healthy balance continuously, and then use that as a tool whenever it makes sense.
Yep, that makes sense. And I have a follow-up question. Does it matter what is the phase of the project? So, for example, if it's in the beginning, do you think that we should have all the 4 areas in the first 3-6 months of the project, or should we start adopting this framework only after the project has been shipped, is already in production, let's say?
That's a really great question, and I'm a big fan of breaking the rules, and I think this is an example of kind of one area where you just need to break the rules. So yes, I think it's all about the healthy balance, but when you're just starting on something new, you just don't have a lot of technical depth because you just wrote your first line of code yesterday. So how is it going to be broken in any significant way yet? So in the beginning, I don't think you need to focus on this kind of stuff, because this is kind of the management overhead stuff that is really valuable in the long term. But at the same time, in the beginning, you should just figure out, how do we get as quickly as possible to the goals we have and ship something and have something. And I would even go as far as saying that you don't have to do code reviews for your first, let's say, 100 commits on a new project, because you can review all of that at once after the first week or two. And why slow it down by asking for a review when the risk is zero? Like, this thing is not running in production. No one's using it for anything. The risk of building too much stuff that's impossible to understand is pretty low, because you can still fix it in 2 weeks. So just try to go as quickly as possible to your goals. And this is the kind of stuff that you add later to optimize for the long term.
Yeah, I also like the idea of having so-called technical retrospective. So, after the first 2 months, let's say, you grab all the team and then you reevaluate all the decisions that had to look at the architecture, the code, the project structure, and also like this idea. Yeah, okay. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Yeah. Hi. Thank you for the chat. Actually, something related to what we were discussing about the stabilisation sprints. What we do in our case, because we can afford it, our work is very seasonal. So during summer, and we're focusing just one market. So during summer, like the business pretty much stops. And then the development team, we are from a different country. So we take that chance where like the activity slows down a lot to focus solely in tech debt and whatever. Ongoing, you keep a healthy balance, but then when you have a chance, just 100% of the focus goes into thinking in making things better, right? But as a result from that, something you said, although you mentioned pushback in the old like team you were working with, and I'm curious. So in your experience and everybody's experience, when you've gotten some pushback from, oh no, we don't have time for that, we just need to ship this feature or whatnot, what is usually the most common argument for not giving you the space to address what needs to be addressed?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really just about a company that, is it a company that kind of understands products and product development and engineering, or is it more of a kind of a traditional business? The reality is that if you kind of went to the business school 30 years ago and kind of didn't study this kind of software world and product world, likely you're kind of thinking in a very Taylorian ways on kind of how to manage things. And then it might be a really difficult argument to have. What I try to always do is that when I'm running product development, I try to make sure that I educate the rest of the business as much as possible on the realities of software development, so that when things get tough, you don't have to, in the middle of an argument, try to explain the fundamentals of how to build software, but rather you kind of do that well ahead of the time, so that it's a lot more pleasant conversation to be had. Because I don't think there's usually that many good arguments for kind of withholding that prioritization decision from the team and making it somewhere else. But realistically, that's how many companies operate. And yeah, it's really our job to try to educate everyone else around us on kind of what's good for us in the long term and mid-term and short term. And I mean, sometimes it's kind of a trade-off that they might be right. So it tends to be that business people are often optimizing for the like short-term goals and kind of getting something out there right now. And developers often tend to be optimizing for maybe longer term that what you might actually need. So you're trying to find a balance in this type of prioritization as well. And you should try to have a good conversation about it.
And but do you think that sometimes we fail to communicate the criticality or importance of that? Sometimes as engineers or technical engineering managers, we get too focused on the problem itself that we fail to like side with the business people, right? And try to bring it to their terms. And I don't know if you agree with that we also fail many times in doing that.
Yes, we certainly fail in that quite regularly, and it is a really common thing. And that's exactly the like thinking for really long-term solutions for something that really doesn't have to, like, there's no business requirement for thinking that long-term and so on. Like that's a very common dynamic. So it is our responsibility as technology leaders to understand the business side better, and at the same time educate everyone else on the software development side, so that we can come up with these intelligent compromises that kind of take into account both views, rather than having this, but some people are promoting this healthy tension between business and engineering, where engineering always just wants to refactor everything and business always just wants to ship new features. I don't think that's a good way to do it. You want both of them to understand each other's arguments and then come up with something that's kind of pretty good for both. And I think it's also good to lay out some foundational rules for how you want to run your organization, who makes these prioritization decisions, because ultimately, in my opinion, a development team needs to make its own prioritization decisions, because how could they take ownership of something that they didn't actually decide on, but someone else kind of somehow made them do those individual tasks? Because like the software you build is it's a result of an incredibly long list of tasks, and if you're not able to control those queues yourself, the end result is something really surprising. And I think the team needs to own that. So that's something to agree on already before the argument.
I also believe for what it's worth, that this is sometimes a failure to communicate that goes both sides, both on the engineering side or in the business side. I happen to work in both kinds of environments, where the business side was very tech savvy and understood engineering priorities, and another one when it was kind of less so. What I've seen, and just wanted to ask if that was your experience as well, is that when the business stakeholders are not really tech savvy, or you're not able to create that productive communication, usually that's where creating like swim lanes and fixed allocation for things works a little bit better, because basically you do the negotiation once, you allocate, let's say 30% of the time on your KTLO, and then everybody knows that it is what it is, and you move forward with that. Otherwise, negotiating all the time, feature by feature, activity by activity, is something that maybe you are more comfortable with stakeholders who understand priorities and can bring value to the table, but otherwise easily becomes a nightmare with less tech savvy stakeholders.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, you can build a process that will help you with this kind of decision making, and that will take away some of the arguments, because quite often it's basically a question of who's the most vocal about stuff that they want, and so on. And for example, let's say you have a internal tools team, it might make sense to have one queue of work going to one swim lane for stuff that's coming from marketing, and then there's stuff that's coming from sales ops, and you're going to be working on the number one priority of those two teams all the time. And once you ship it, they can decide what comes in next. Like, you can build this kind of structures to help you with this prioritization.
Yeah. I have another. Just go, please.
Yeah, I mean, like, I have one which is a bit more generic, because it's often asked inside the community. So one of the challenges that is repeated a lot is that technical leaders, they want to be better leaders, and they do not have a good business sense, for example, right? Because they've always been involved into coding, especially the younger ones who aspire to be, maybe a CTO or a senior engineering leader. What is it that you would advise young tech leaders who aspire to be senior leaders or CTOs one day to do, or ask? Maybe what kind of questions are they supposed to ask? Because there's so much to learn on the side. Maybe something which is just enough that they could get their know-how on, and they're set. Is this? I mean, you work in startups. You've advised companies. So what would you advise there?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it takes a long time to develop kind of a really broad sense of that, but you can already start today with something really small, and it starts from the attitude, and that's a cultural thing in your company. Like, what kind of attitude do we tolerate? Is it okay to have developers who are saying that I don't care at all what this team does, I just want to get my next ticket, and that's it? That might be the environment for some, and then some companies are pretty explicit that they want people to at least be interested in different things. And when you have that kind of an environment, it's a lot easier for others to be interested in it too, and so on. Then I would really start, rather than understanding the business and how things are done, I would start from your customers, because customers are ultimately the most important thing about business, and understanding them is kind of the starting point for understanding what's a good way to serve customers. So when you understand who they are, what kind of problems do they have, then it's a lot easier to come up with solutions for them. And it's what has the most impact for most engineering leaders, that then they are going to be making better prioritization decisions together with the product management and everyone else. So for example, in our team, we have a bi-weekly Gong Club, which is where we watch, we're using this tool for recording customer calls. So every 2 weeks, we watch one of the customer calls, and then we just talk about it. We just went through an onboarding call with someone, and we kind of saw how we onboard customers, how we onboard team leads, and so on. We saw the type of problems they had when they tried to navigate the product for the first time, and so on. So we just bring them closer to the team, and that's one way to do it. And then finally, just connecting with the rest of your organization rather than just being with your team, you can start learning about it. So we also organized these virtual coffees with randomized people in the company. So I just had a virtual coffee with someone from our Denver office and learn more about what they are doing there on a daily basis and so on. So that's a nice way. If you just keep doing that every couple of weeks, you're going to be learning so much more about what's important to people, what's difficult about their job. And that's also good for building the empathy to other people. There's often this sales is doing that and engineering is doing that type of finger pointing going on in companies. And that's often because people don't understand each other's jobs well enough, and they don't understand why is it difficult, how much pressure is sales under to kind of deliver on the number. And on the other hand, how much is engineering dealing with all the scalability issues and whatever. And that's why they're not shipping these features. So the more you can get people to understand each other, the easier it is for everyone to work together. And that's maybe the third point I would add.
Yeah, that's amazing. Before Luca's question, I definitely want to say the first thing that you mentioned is very solid, because I've been in a software company before, and I was a solutions architect, and I was so surprised. Whenever we had certain bugs, for which we really had to go to the developers, and deep dive. It was so often the case in that company that they had no idea that this is what how it feels like to be at the consumer's end, because they never got it. They never understood where the user is coming from, and we had to bridge that gap for them all the time. And that's it's solid. Yeah, that's definitely the first step everyone should do. Yeah.
So thank you, Jess, for the question. Since the time is almost up, are there any other questions? Okay, so I go with my last question, kind of a very specific one, Otto, because I remember you saying at the beginning, how to start, measuring and labeling things in the various buckets. And you said you can start anyway, looking at the past, creating a spreadsheet and saying, hey, this is KTLO, this is productivity, etc. To make like an assessment also about how you have been spending time so far. Moving forward, do you think items should be labeled like manually by the team? Do you trust like automatic ways? There are tools, of course, that tell you this is new stuff, this is like repaying technical debt, this is churn. What's your take on this?
Yeah, well, you should try to make it as easy to use as possible, because obviously developers are not maybe fond of having to add a label for every single thing that they're doing. But for example, the way we are doing it in our team is that, for example, all the work that's related to epics is by default, it's new stuff. And then we have like some different issue types in Jira for like, okay, these tasks are by default keeping the lights on and so on. So it kind of happens automatically for the most part. And then the gap is relatively easy to close. So try to make it like, it is good to think about the developer experience of it a little bit.
Yeah, makes sense. So thank you, Otto, so much for being here with us, for the great talk and for answering all the questions. And thank you, everybody, for being here, following the talk, and also asking great questions today. Thank you, everybody.
Yeah, thank you for the great questions.
And
Thanks,
also,
Otto.
I encourage everyone to also have a look at Swarmia, which is a great tool, and that's why we got in touch with Otto and the rest of the team at the beginning, because we really loved the tool and we wanted to do something together. So that said, have a great day. We will publish the recording in the community. So even guys that couldn't make it can catch up, or you can watch the recording anytime. And see you, everybody, in the community. Bye, guys.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Ciao, ciao.